Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben DiPietro. I'm with LRN Corporation. I'm the editor of the LRN ENC Pulse newsletter, which I hope you all will sign up for. You can Google it or go down to our LRN booth, and we have a tablet that'll help you sign up. Formerly with the Wall Street Journal, where I was editor of the Risk and Compliance Journal. So that's my background in compliance. I'll let my colleagues here introduce themselves as we get along, but hopefully we're going to give you a little positive news today about some of the success stories that they've had, and maybe some that you can share with us as well about how compliance and ethics have been able to work together with HR and other departments to begin to forge relationships and to understand that you are all on the same team and moving in the same direction, which I guess is not always apparent to everybody involved in these things. And hopefully we can share some pointers with each other and help everyone get better adjusted at how to manage those relationships in your own organizations. I'll start with you, Lori. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Lori Gallagher. I'm the Chief Compliance Counsel for SABIC, otherwise known as Saudi Basic Industries Incorporated. And for those who don't know, since we're only really beginning to make ground in brand recognition in the U.S., we're the third largest chemical manufacturing corporation in the world. We were headquartered in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, with a fair amount of our operations still in Saudi, about 70% of our employees in operations, but we do have a very significant global footprint across the globe. We operate in about 50 countries with significant presence and many other countries with a smaller presence. We have about 40,000 employees. I've been with the company since 2007 when a division of GE, the GE Plastics company, or GE Plastics, was acquired by SABIC. And before that, I was formerly with GE for 14 years in litigation and compliance.
My name is Lisa Beth Lentini. I started out at the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington, D.C., and after that I moved to the Midwest, to Minneapolis, and have worked for Best Buy, and I started the global compliance function at Carlson Wagon Lee Travel, which has presence in over 150 countries. And I'm currently the Chief Compliance Officer and the co-chair of the Enterprise Risk Council at Deluxe Corporation, which you may know of as the Czech company, but it's been around for 100 years, but now it's much more than checks. It includes fintech and small business support for everything from startup until mass market.
And I'm Katie Lawler. I am the Global Chief Ethics Officer at U.S. Bank, also in Minneapolis. I've been with U.S. Bank since 2002 in roles in employment law, human resources, and now, for the last 2 years, ethics.
Before we get started with questions, just a quick show of hands. How many people here are from the HR function?
Yeah.
All right, so we got a one-sided team here today. Got compliance up here, so yes, that's what I was just making sure. You feel free. With that said, I'll start with you, Katie. How, for each of you, though, how would you all describe your overall experience in trying to partner ethics and compliance with human resources? What have you learned so far from your attempts, and how has that changed your current approaches?
Our experience has been very interesting because until the beginning of 2017, the ethics function sat in human resources. It was part of our employee relations group, and I managed it there for 8 years when I was the employee relations director. And in 2017, we made a decision as an enterprise to elevate ethics to a standalone function, and I was asked to lead that, and it sits within our legal department. And so it was a difficult relationship at first because I like to tell my team, we didn't just move their cheese, we took it. And and I think because HR has historically kind of owned all things employee in their minds, it was a difficult to really figure out whose lane, whose turf was what. Some of our initial challenges really came down to when we would try to engage with HR, we'd get the question, well, what is the problem we're trying to solve for? My team heard that a lot. And, well, our survey scores are really high, so why do we need to do this? So that was a really interesting experience for my team. And so we really focused on building the relationships and showing the connection with all of the various HR touch points to the ethical culture of the organization, and really tried to demonstrate that we could help HR as a subject matter expert in our area to really elevate what they were doing through those partnerships. And we ultimately had some great successes that we'll talk about later. So really, our whole approach to the ethics program is, it's not, I would say it's not some program we're just going to plunk down on top of people, but that we sort of integrate into every aspect of the employee life cycle. And so that HR partnership is absolutely vital. And we also gave HR some wins in some other areas that we'll also talk about, and that really helped cement the partnership.
And I'll say, you know, in the different organizations that I have been a part of, to Katie's point, it has to be very collaborative, and part of that collaboration is really learning the language. And that's the language of the hearts and minds of the people that you're working with. We all come in from different vantage points, and we all bring our own language, right? Oftentimes, what I see is compliance is a language of acronyms. And that is so alienating for so many people, especially for our friends in HR, that it really becomes a kind of a labor of love to pull together language that appeals and an approach that is meaningful to multiple constituencies and multiple stakeholders. And believe it or not, being able to sell what you do as an ethics officer or as a compliance officer is very important to getting buy-in. And so part of the process of partnering is to understand the needs and how you can be a part of solutioning some of those needs with your internal clients.
Well, I think we've seen quite an evolution of at SABIC. When we first integrated across the globe, putting all of the different pieces of the legacy, historical legacy businesses together, we didn't have a global compliant functions. We didn't have a global HR function. So there was a lot of understanding of what each function is supposed to do, what is the division of labor, responsibilities, tasks, communications. So we spent a lot of time in sort of creating that definition to begin with, what was in the realm of HR, what was in the realm of compliance. Fast forwarding to now, I would say our issues are not all that different than other companies. And I think the really key learning point we've had, particularly in the most recent years, is the need to really integrate and feed each other, and the fact that, from an employee's perspective, you really can't have a bright line between compliance and HR. You've got to figure it out amongst yourselves as to how to present to the employees your expectations of their behavior and what will happen when they don't stay within those expectations of behavior, and how we're going to define that for them. But we really do need to we really have, I think, come to the realization where we've got to work together. And, there are some practical challenges that we'll talk about, but I think we're very much in that position now where the penny has really dropped, that we've got to do a better job, holding hands and supporting each other's functions.
Katie, you made some reference to sort of trying to figure out who owns what part and how figure out the lanes. And let's stay with you, Lori. How do you decide those things, and how do you figure out who's going to do what and when, and what happens if there's overlap? How does that tension get worked through?
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we are very much in that process right now. I think, the most difficult piece of it is the employee relations part, where an employee has an issue which may border on a compliance issue, may border on a purely behavioral issue, and it's really difficult to determine what it is without getting the facts out there. And so the question is, okay, who digs into the facts? Right now, the way we have it set up is that there's multiple channel reporting, but we have agreed on a cooperative analysis process whereby the ultimate call of whether something is or is not a compliance issue still rests with the compliance function, and then we pass off the more employee relations issues to HR I think the more difficult piece of that is when there's something that kind of goes back to HR, or it really is an employee relations issue, not something that falls under the code of ethics or law or compliance. How do we make sure that the employees are still feeling that they have been equally cared for, as if, whether it's a serious compliance issue or it's really just a fairly minor employee relations issue? We've got to make sure that the employees are still feeling like they've had the engagement from both of the teams, so that issues are resolved and they don't get turned off to coming to compliance or coming to HR when they do see something that's potentially corrosive.
And to that point, this gets into the issues of data sharing and your case management systems. How do you decide who's keeping what data, and when there's a dispute over whose data it is, how is there a process to resolve it?
Well, I'll echo some of what Lori said, which is, this is a little bit of a dance, right? And you have to be connected with your partner. And so what we've done is we are very clear on when something is exclusively employee relations versus when something is a mixed matter. And in mixed matters, there's actually a coordinated effort to make sure that both employee relations and compliance or ethics are kind of landing the plane at the same time, because that coordination is so critical. It's also critical to understand where your data is and make sure that there's not an approach that's so proprietary that you're not sharing information. Some jurisdictions have limitations on what can be shared, and there can be collective bargaining agreements and other things that come in the way of total transparency between the teams. But that's where understanding your organization is really critical, because there are ways to communicate with each other without revealing certain information, which will allow you to be able to be successful in your role. And many organizations don't have a shared case management system, or they may have multiple. We have a single case management system, but that was a long, difficult journey.
Katie, your experience?
I would echo very much. It's those employee relations issues in particular where that overlap can occur. My team manages the hotline, but we don't do the investigations. So we perform an oversight role. And so we were very clear at the outset to articulate what that looks like. And it was the source of some tension with HR, especially when we kind of tracked some metrics around how many of the cases we had to send back because they weren't adequately investigated or documented, in our opinion, and there were a lot. That was not that well received. And although we worked through it, we talked about why we had done that analysis was to help them make the case for some changes that they wanted to make. And we had the data that would help support their efforts to do some work. And so once everyone's intentions were clear, that helped a lot. But with the data, one of the things that has helped me is I have a regulator expectation that the ethics office is doing the data aggregation on the investigations, regardless of whether they came in through our hotline. Our regulators are looking at us to, in the wake of industry issues, to connect the dots. And our audit committee is expecting that from me as well. So I have a little bit of a platform from which to require access to certain things, but we also want to make sure that we're sharing back with HR what they need to know. We perform really that oversight role of when an investigation comes through the hotline and we deem it an ethics matter. Certain things will close out as an HR/ER matter, turn it over to HR, it's theirs. But if we deem it an ethics matter, and we define that pretty broadly, the case doesn't get closed until we are satisfied that the investigation was thorough, complete, that the findings seem to be reasonable. We're not there to read all the investigation notes or anything like that, but we want to make sure that when we look at a piece of paper with the investigation report on it, that it looks like it was a fulsome investigation, that the right people were interviewed, the conclusions seem rational, and that the actions taken were rational, and that someone reading that, i.e. internal audit, because they test us 4 times a year, it seems like, can follow that. And so we will push back on that, but it's really in the vein of oversight, and I think we've gotten to a much better place with that. Yes?
For the matters that you're simply holding out or referring are group oversight or
Yeah, the question was for the cases that we turn over to HR as an HR/ER issue, non-ethics. We don't, but it's a pretty narrow group. It's literally my coworker used my coffee cup, and it was my coffee cup.
And
Don't need to track that.
I will say on our side, we do make sure that all of those matters that are referred are closed out and that there's documentation. And that's just the approach that we've chosen to take on all of the HR complaints, whether they be, anything in that specter of what could qualify as an HR or employee relations issue.
Lori, how do you maintain an active dialogue with your HR partners?
with-
We'll have time for questions in the middle, and don't want to keep going down to that.
Yep.
So how do you maintain an active dialogue with your HR partners? How often do you speak with them, and is it always coming from you? Is there a back and forth now, and has it taken a while to get to that point?
I think that initially, most of the conversations were initiated on the compliance side, going to HR, in particular, sort of following on the heels of what the discussion just previously was we would often hear, well, we brought a matter to you, to the compliance group, the hotline, whatever, came through us, and we referred it to HR. And then the employees had the feeling that they did not have resolution, that there was no visible results, no visible addressing of the issue. And while we don't really want to, keep our fingers in those employee relations issues, we do think it's important for both the good of HR and the good of the compliance functions to make sure that employees are feeling that their issues actually are resolved and addressed. So we have initiated a lot of conversations with HR in terms of the need for visible resolution of issues, regardless of what kind of issue it is. And even if it's, somebody's using my coffee cup, that person who's annoyed about the coffee cup might be the next person who sees somebody stealing, and that's something that needs to be addressed. So we are working to try and address that better, to ask HR to work on a system so that they can manage on their side resolution of all of the issues that we refer to them. But we do tend to check on those more. What we don't know is what's coming straight to HR, which I think potentially can be an issue. And one of the things that I think has really, really helped us recently is we've done a lot of live town hall roundtables, employee sessions with both HR and compliance together. And that really, I think, has made very, real-time visible the issues that employees are struggling with, and how that's hurting not only the perception of the compliance function in the compliance program, but also hurting the employee engagement and retention and feeling like this is a good place to work. So it's hurting the mission of HR. And I think that has really made the penny drop for both functions, that we've got to do a better job, addressing all employee issues.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges, but this is a happy place, and we're going to talk about your successes now. And so we'll start with you, Katie. I know you've been working with your HR team on areas of communication and training, and have taken in a number of projects under your wing. And if you can tell us about some of that and how you've managed these from concept through implementation, and what stage HR was brought in, and maybe any of the issues you had to work through to get to the success.
Sure. I think our biggest success has been, obviously one of our two, has been our code training. We rely on our enterprise education team within Human Resources to help us build that course. And we refresh the course every other year. And so last year was a training year. So in 2017, we were working to revamp the course. And we engaged them immediately. We went to enterprise education. We said we want to redo the course. I really liked the prior course. I was really happy with it. It was something we had built when I was in employee relations, and we got good feedback on it. And what we learned was that they couldn't. We'd moved to a new learning management system, and they couldn't port it in. They had to start over. So we challenged them to be innovative and be creative, and I challenged my team. I wanted something fresh and new and engaging, and they came back to us. They came back to me with a proposal, and I didn't like it. I thought it was a step backward. We went from a really cool kind of graphic novel approach that was really different. None of the other trainings looked like it, to kind of a standard e-learning course. And I I very gently said, we're a new standalone ethics function. I think we really need to do something that's takes it to a higher level than this. And I feel like we're taking a step backward. And that was all they needed to hear because they wanted to do something creative. And so the result was they came back to us with a fantastic proposal. And there were some things that they had been wanting to try that other groups had sort of started down the path and then pulled back. And so we have sort of an understanding with our enterprise education team that we'll be your guinea pigs. You want to try something new? Come to the ethics office because we're totally in. And it's really been a great partnership, and it gave them some big wins because they got great kudos for the final product as well as we did. They've won awards for it. They've taken it to trade shows to show it off. And so having that early win with our training team, they've come to me this year for next year's training with a radical new idea that we're really excited about. And I think having freed them up, they see us as the partner they want to work with, which is just the greatest win. The other things that we've done in the training and communication space, we've worked with HR in the wake of Me Too. We created some, we call them meeting in a box, for managers and employees to have conversations about harassment, about behavior in the workplace. And my team kind of came up with the idea, but we immediately engaged employee relations, and we said, this seems like a great opportunity for us to work together. And we had a platform to get the information out, and they had a subject matter expertise. So we were able to work together and do some just-in-time and build some resources. So, it's been a really positive win. And then in communication, our communication team is separate, but we've done some really innovative things there that we can talk about later. And then the last area was HR was rolling out a whole new manager essentials training curriculum. And this was where we felt like we had a win. They came to us and solicited content from us. And that was, that we had gotten to a place where it was no longer what problem are you trying to solve for, but them inviting us in was the big win. And so we were able to develop, working with them, ethics-related content around different managerial competencies that infuse the whole course. And so, again, really, that partnership with the training team has just been probably one of the bright spots for us.
It sounds like the success, too, helps build the trust that they were talking about in the plenary session.
It absolutely does.
And that makes it easier to go forward, I'm sure.
They make us look good, and we, in turn, made them look good. Sure. So it's an absolute win.
Lisa Beth, you were talking about how you were able to work with HR to reinforce messages about ethics and compliance. When did that effort start? What does it involve? And how are you seeing a difference in how employees are receiving and engaging with the messages?
So when I started at Deluxe, our ethics had been run by our employment lawyer, which led to a 3-page Word document, which was our code.
Employment lawyers.
It was a 3-page Word document, which was the code. And after I fainted and then got myself up off the floor, I decided, okay, first things first, right? When you're in the middle of something, just start at the beginning and start to build momentum. And so one of the first things that I did was I brought together a team of people from multiple functions who had kind of a little spark in them, a little passion around doing the right thing. And it was more heavily weighted towards HR because I knew that those were some of the influencers that I needed to have to make a pretty significant change. And so we worked over months to develop a code that was in line with our brand, in line with our values, that included all the different areas that we talked about in our values and incorporated concepts that one would expect to see in a code of business ethics. That led to us starting to work together more closely to complement each other because since HR and actually quite a few other functions were so integrally involved in the creation of this new version of our code, they saw themselves as being ambassadors and stewards of it. And so that buy-in led to us doing a number of different things. We worked with brand and we worked with our HR folks to start a regular cadence of communication. And now we've gotten it to the point where in even months, we have a manager communication that talks about different things that are associated with ethical conduct and some of our compliance functions, as well as information security, since that's become such a huge area of potential risk from a compliance and ethics standpoint. And in the odd months, we have a similar content, an appearance for our diversity, equity, and inclusion, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is so integrally tied to having a respectful workplace and a workplace where people feel valued. And so there's a little bit different, color scheme around, ethics and compliance is yellow and diversity, equity, and inclusion is blue. But there's a similar look and feel, and we're working together to make sure that the content is harmonized over time and that we're planning ahead so that we have messaging that is relatable from all of these different areas. And so it's allowed us to amplify the voice of compliance and ethics and amplify the voices of those other functions in harmony. So it's that togetherness and kind of relatedness that helps to make the message stronger.
Lori, you had to work through some issues with your HR team regarding responsiveness to some resolution of employee issues you've touched on a little bit. How were you able to get those changes, and how were you able to get more focused by redefining your company's Leadership Way program?
So as I mentioned, one of the issues was sort of some of the issues kind of going off into the stratosphere and not really knowing what happened to them, and that is something that, again, through our joint sessions has become a clear and apparent need to both the compliance folks and the HR folks that we need to address. And one of the things that we're doing now in SABIC is developing something called the SABIC Leadership Way, which is an attempt to unify all of the different positive behavior expectations for the company, so that that's a topic that's been discussed over and over again throughout the course of the day. Is the challenge is not just telling your employees what they can't do, but trying to set the clear expectations for what is good behavior, and that is something that I think was really we're really trying to help with. Regardless of what your function is, regardless of what your leadership role is owning the outcome and owning a positive outcome is something that we're really focusing on right now. And it's something that, rather than segmenting expectations, where we're coming with, one unified face of employee behavioral expectations, and helping the HR team to address those issues is part of that, because then they can see what issues need to be addressed beyond the sort of what I'll say strict things that fit within the compliance violation label, but the other things that we need to do to address what might be, pulling, possibly creating friction within the company, within inter-employee interactions.
We'll move on a little bit now to hiring and onboarding, two issues traditionally belonging to HR, but for which ethics and compliance has an avid interest. And most important to bring people in that are going to fit the culture, and that's probably the most important intersection where that happens. Let's start with you, Lisa Beth. How were you able to get ethics and compliance more integrated into these functions, and for what purposes, and where did you able to have this had an impact on changing hiring guidelines or on the actual decisions for job candidates themselves?
So we have elements of our values included in our standard interview packets, and there are a lot of options in terms of questions that can be asked that fit in line with our values. So as part of our ongoing discussion, we continue to refine and revise a lot of these questions, and then talk about relatively regularly what the most successful candidates look like when they really are values driven. And so that's one of the ways that we have incorporated the ethics and compliance team into these really critical points of decision making with HR.
Katie, at what point do you start ethics and compliance messaging with new hires? And what is done during the hiring process to sort of gauge where a candidate's ethics might be?
Well, we start before they're even hired. We start in our recruiting and our job postings, on our recruiting site, we make sure we have key messages about the importance of ethics and trust as a core value at U.S. Bank. Right from the beginning, we want anybody even considering a career at U.S. Bank to know how important this is to us. And then we have worked with our HR recruiting team. The first thing we did actually was look at the way our sourcing specialists operate to screen resumes. And so they're out screening resumes, and we wanted to help them understand what would be some red flags that they should be looking for that could indicate a potential mismatch with our values, and what would be some positive things to be looking for. And so we created some guidelines and tools for them to use as they're screening resumes. And then we worked with, but also then how to interpret that. And then we worked with them on the interview guides. So making sure we are adding some, questions about, tell me a time when someone asked you to do something that you thought was wrong. What did you do about it? Tell me about a time you made a mistake. What did you do about it? And then we also, as part of that, though, we wanted to make sure that the recruiters and the hiring managers using that guide kind of knew, well, what's a good answer. So wanted to make sure that they had sort of a sense of what are you looking for when you're asking this question. So we did that. And then we worked on the new hire site. So when someone joins U.S. Bank, we have a new hire microsite. And one of the first things I noticed when I looked at it with having taken my HR hat off and having put on my ethics hat was it was all about our focus on the customer, but it didn't have, and so customer service, customer centrality, but it didn't have any language about ethics and trust and integrity. And so we worked with HR and our communications team to just, again, weave that throughout. And that's been really successful, that sort of weaving it throughout. We've woven it into our corporate social responsibility report, our annual report, our new hire microsite, all the things that you would hope a new hire is looking at when they look at your company. We want to make sure that focus on doing the right thing is woven throughout every piece of collateral that someone might see when they're looking to join U.S. Bank.
Quick question, show of hands, including for the panel. How many of you check social media for prospective hires before you hire them to make sure they've sort of aligned in their own personal lives are sort of living, you're not going to find anything that's going to cause embarrassment later. Enough. Before we move on, anyone questions from the audience? A couple we can take now.
So our case management, we report everything that we consider to be an ethics and compliance matter. So if it's reported in through the hotline or if there's something that has an ethics and compliance element to it. It depends on what the nature of the case is.
And then we do something slightly different.
Yeah,
the question about what do we report when there's a shared case management system. We don't have a shared case management system, but what we did was we have our ethics system, and then we have certain categories of issues that are mandatory escalations, that HR, if they learn about it, they must notify us and we'll create a case. They may still manage it, but there are just certain categories we've decided right now are very critical. So in financial services, anything involving your anti-money laundering program is super, super sensitive. So we want to know if anybody's raising concerns about that. So that has to come into us along with some other, anything about an executive. But so we have the universe of things that are in our case management system. I also, every quarter, get all of the internal fraud investigations from our fraud investigations team and risk management, and I get all of HR's investigations that they track in their centralized team. And I have to marry all of that up for the board. So they want to see that more holistic view of employee misconduct investigations.
Okay.
It comes in through your hotline, clearly ER, so the coffee mug, or she got to where she. Do you screen those out if you're recording?
The HR ER, we'll have a line item saying how many cases were just HR ER that we referred over, but then we don't, unless it became an investigation that HR really took note of.
So we do it a little bit differently. If it comes in through the hotline, even if it is an HR or ER matter, we indicate, what it was, and then close it out. And sometimes we get, things that are a little bit more bizarre. Like we get sometimes customer, complaints, or even opt-outs. Like, I don't want you calling me anymore, or I don't like getting your mail. And we will record those so that our numbers all tie out, simply identifying that as a customer issue, even though, right, I am not doing an investigation to take somebody off of a mailing list.
And we do the same thing.
Right.
So we tick and tie so that we know anything that came in through ethics, we know where it went. So we will parse that out on our slides showing what our volumes were of what was an ethics issue, what was an HR/ER, what was a customer inquiry or a question, and tick and tie those. But then when I'm doing the analysis for trending and looking for hotspots, I'm really looking then at all of those investigations across all three pools to see what those, do we have a department that's popping or something like that.
Or are you seeing like an increase on customer complaints about shipping and handling or
Right.
whatever it is, right?
Lori, you have a little bit different experience working for an international company with offices around. In what ways have you had to progress the relationship between HR and compliance so everybody has an interest in that diversity of cultures and individuals in the global markets, and talk about how you manage to do all that?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the interesting things is we are a Saudi headquartered company, so we face issues that are, I think, a bit different than, say, a really large U.S. or Western-based company with a global presence. We have our headquarters and our main heritage is Saudi heritage, and the culture, the Saudi culture, and in particular, I would say the SABIC culture as a predominantly manufacturing, engineering type of company was very, very, very rules-based. And that was true for HR as well as for what was, they're serving their compliance function, even though they didn't have a function called compliance. It was, sort of HR, ER types of things, and it was very, very, very rules-based. And we're really trying to, both with HR and with the compliance function and with the culture in general, is shift from a rules-based, don't break the rules kind of culture to a let's all help each other find a way to do the right thing. And that is a change even within HR. So that's a big evolution that we've been going through. And that goes back in part to what I was speaking to before, which was the SABIC leadership way, which is really to change the mindset of what we're asking our employees and how are we reinforcing that. And we've got still some ways to go for, the folks that have been used to, well, you did this wrong, that's a demerit. We want to really shift that whole mindset. Actually, my Middle East compliance leader is sitting in the back there, and he's done quite a lot of that mindset shift of owning the outcome versus just going through the check boxes and getting to the rules result rather than the right result.
Lisa Beth, you had some experience with this at Carlson. Can you share some of your experience?
Well, when you take 150 countries and you mix them all together, you get some interesting outcomes. One of the things that I heard earlier today for those people that were participating in the Microsoft session was, and it resonated with me, is, humor is not universal. And I remember being so excited. I went to my French head of HR and I said, there are these great videos, they're hilarious. And he's like, they are not funny. And I was like, what are you talking about? Humor is not universal. Suspense is, which is, I found that resonated.
I wrote that
true.
down. I'm taking that back to the office.
But there are very different perspectives when you're working with many different nationalities. There are even different perspectives within the United States about what different words mean and what are, triggering events based on a person's background. And when you go international and global with that, it just compounds the need for courageous conversations, really learning to always operate with an air of respect and candor, and being able to, be a global citizen and understand that sometimes you may perceive something that, may actually not be reality. I know we were talking about this ahead of time about, different approaches to interactions, either between the sexes or with people from different geographic areas. Being able to navigate that becomes infinitely more challenging. It's doable. I mean, people do business internationally all the time, but you need to be able to work with multiple vantage points and take in a lot more views, I think, than if you're working with a very small, homogenous set of people.
Organizations that are considered to have robust and effective ethics and compliance programs have strong support from leadership that's been borne out from reports just like the LRNs come out today and at the Sphere and everybody that we've been mentioning here. Let's start with for each of you, but we'll start with Katie. How do you keep your leadership teams actively engaged in these issues? How do you overcome any skepticism they might have exhibited initially? And are there financial benefits that come when departments are less territorial and more collaborative, and how much weight does that carry in the boardroom to advance your message?
My experience has been interesting because I was asked to take this job by our CEO in January of 2017. I think he asked me to do it in November of 16, and then he announced his retirement in January or February of 17. And so then I had to break in a new CEO, and this was not his idea, right? This standalone ethics thing. Fortunately, between what we're doing and what our strategy and corporate affairs team are doing, and if you were in the communication session earlier, our head of communications was in there talking about reputation. We've got a lot of good data, and our CEO is our former CFO, and data is his language. So being able to present the data to get their buy-in is really valuable. I'm also incredibly fortunate to have an audit committee chair who has worked for companies or has been on boards of other companies that have had serious issues, and he is incredibly supportive of what we're doing because of his experience at some companies that have had really major scandals. So every quarter I present to the audit committee, and every quarter, almost without fail, he talks, and our CEO and our general counsel and our chief risk officer are all in the room to hear him say how important this is, that he is hearing this, that we're doing this. So that's obviously really valuable to have such support from the board. But one of the things that I really am focused on doing is having a couple of really key leadership champions at the top of the house who can help carry the message and amplify it, because it can't just be Katie's job. So we've done some really creative different things. I took one of our vice chairmen for a ride in my car with 2 GoPro cameras, and we did our version. It's on the Bella website for those who are Bella members. And we talked about customer centrality and being customer obsessed and how that connects to doing the right thing, one of our core values. And the idea being to really show how ethics is a business enabler. And so having someone like that who really will talk the talk at the top levels of the company helps amplify the message for us and gives us the platform. We also do have a new conduct risk committee. It is our executive team. We meet quarterly and present them with data and information about A, what we're doing, and B, what the data is telling us, so that they can be really informed. And a lot of that is an offshoot of things that have happened in our industry in the last few years, and making sure that our leaders are informed, and they want to be informed, and they have said, we don't want to be caught off guard. We don't want to be that CEO who doesn't know what was happening in the organization. So there is definitely an appetite for them to have more information. And so knowing that our CEO's love language is numbers is helpful to be able to bring him what resonates with him.
Lisa?
I like that you used love language, because it really is, right? Using the right vocabulary, being able to call to things that are meaningful for your audience. At Deluxe, part of the organization is manufacturing focused. It's manufacturing checks. And there's actually quite a bit of regulation around that. Part of the organization is regulated by a group called the FFIEC. And then there's another large chunk of the organization that is not highly regulated. So the approach with those different leaders, you have to be able to flex your approach because they have different drivers. Their customers are different. You know, the customers in the not particularly heavily regulated space are small business. And we have this, you know, great program where they're doing a small business revolution and it's on Hulu and it's very kind of trendy. And then the other portion of the business is extraordinarily highly regulated, and there's, you know, folks from the OCC and the Federal Reserve that are coming in and saying this is what the requirements are, and it's a lot more prescriptive, and our customers and clients in that financial institution space have a very, very different approach than your small business startup. So how you interact with these different leaders has to be slightly different because they have very different businesses. And that's not the same for every company, but it's my truth. It's my reality. It's what I am faced with. So understanding those business drivers and the leaders and how they're motivated and what their clients and customers look like is absolutely critical.
Lori?
I have to echo the point about flexibility and approach to different managers and different leaders within their arena and the world that they live in. One of the things that we've done, you know, we've always had, I think, excellent support from the board and the senior most executives. So that, you know, the top level, that really has not been an issue for us. Where it gets more difficult is sort of the lower level management, and they're saying, okay, well, all right, don't break the rules, I got that, but, you know, what is it exactly you expect me to do? What is the positive traction here for me for the compliance and ethics cultural aspect? And one of the things we've asked everyone within our company to do is everyone who manages people has been asked to come up with one commitment that's going to make their team act in a more positive manner. So whether that's, you know, just one thing, simple thing, and that is vastly different amongst somebody who runs, you know, a multi-million-dollar P&L versus somebody who's managing a small team of IT folks. And we've just asked all of them to come up with one positive thing. And one of the other things we're trying to do is to kind of aggregate those and sift through them and then take the success stories, make those as public as possible so that people are seeing that this is not only a way to, you know, ensure compliance and ethics and to help grow the culture, but to help the managers deal with their teams more effectively in a positive sense. So we're going to try, and this is something that really is still a work in progress, to try to use the success stories and to try to help the managers make positive behaviors of their employees more visible across the organization.
You know, one thing I wanted to add on as I was listening is one of the things that we found, bless you, made a difference is the compliance team. We began a mindfulness journey, and part of that was making sure that we were giving thanks to our partners when we saw them doing really great things. There's a terrific video out there by a group called Soul Pancake that talks about how to give authentic thanks. And we found that just small things that don't cost really anything other than a little bit of time and maybe a little card that says thank you for really being an upstander in raising an issue made a huge difference. And the art of giving thanks to people and recognizing them and celebrating what they are doing that is meaningful for your program has a profound effect on what happens with your program next. Because when you say thank you to somebody, there is something that goes on in their brains that says, you know, I guess I can't really be a jerk anymore. And it changes the dynamic for good. So to the extent that you can incorporate some of that in how you recognize, celebrate, and reward, right? This is a free reward, so there's no bribery, there's no problems with it. But the free reward of just taking the time to give thanks and identify the positives and reinforce the positives really, I think, makes a difference with leaders, with everybody throughout your organization. We started this program where we just created some branded, compliance and ethics cards. And I said every Monday, we are going to spend 7 minutes writing thanks to somebody who did something good, every single person on the team. And we're going to send these across the company. And we have these cards are being like put up in people's cubicles and like they're sending back like selfies with them and saying, it's been 25 years I've worked for this company and I've never received such a nice, authentic thank you. And that makes a difference in everything we do.
Sorry, I may have missed it, but how do you identify who did something good?
Well, I ask everybody on Monday to think about, was there somebody over the last, like there's always somebody who's doing something good.
Just in your, just organizational life, like across the organization?
Well, it's anywhere. So the question was, is it across the organization? It's anywhere where we identify that somebody has done something good, whether it's, being responsive to an email in a timely fashion that was something that was in addition to their day, or saying something complimentary about another team member, or acting in a way that we thought was living out the values. Right? If your value is, innovation, then doing something that was a little bit outside the box and yielded a good result. If you're not finding ways that people are living out your values and are not finding ways to thank people for doing the right thing at all in an entire week, then there's other problems.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering how you get to functions that you never see or never, you know what I'm saying?
We also,
we operate in more than 200 countries.
Yeah. So for people who, may be deeper in the organization than you typically come into contact with, that is something where, depending on who you have as ambassadors and advocates in your program, then you ask them to help as well. We have data stewards, for example, as part of our privacy program, and they are everywhere because data is everywhere. So there are lots of ways that you can kind of get at that based on your own organization, but I can't tell you, what would work for your organization.
Have like a program in place where you can, the same way that you can speak up against something.
Yeah. We also do have some mechanisms to identify through an app people who are doing good things, but that's kind of a separate program that is related. But this is much more kind of homegrown and handwritten.
Yep, we have something actually that we're developing that's right on the point that you're making, which is it's kind of like the inverse of our reporting system. So we have an icon that appears on every employee's computer that, it's called we call it the speak up icon, and there's just a series of simple questions asking them to identify some certain facts so that we can get to the root of whatever it is they believe that they're reporting. And we're actually in the process of developing, we're going to call, I'm not sure what we're going to call it, but it's essentially a compliance and ethics compliments tool. So it's going to be almost the exact same thing, same idea. Anyone can nominate someone else for a specific act. We're still and this kind of goes back to the point about cooperation with HR. What we're working through now is sort of the vetting of the compliments, because you do have to be a little bit careful that you're not rewarding somebody who's just done something really, really bad and we don't know about it yet. So we're trying to work on that. But yeah, that's sort of the idea is just for people to be positive and recognize each other, and hopefully this time next year that'll be in place.
We have a really robust platform for doing internal recognition using an outside vendor, and so you can send e-cards, you can give spot awards, you can give, we call them shield awards, playing on our logo, which actually have a dollar value to them. And we worked with the recognition team in HR to develop some do the right thing themed e-cards, and any employee can send those. And then over time, what I'm hoping to see is that we'll be able to get a report of because every time you send recognition, it asks you which core value it ties to. And so if I can get a report of all of the we do the right thing cards, we can then in the ethics office start even potentially taking more action. Last year I had a really sensitive investigation. I had a group of eight individuals who filed a a really, they really went out on a limb and filed a complaint about something really high profile. And I sent each one of them personally. I sent each one of them some recognition to thank them. We ended up not substantiating what they were worried about, but to thank them for having the courage to speak up. And then later in the year, happened to be in our internal audit function. Later in the year, we had a regulatory issue that we had to have validated, and one of those auditors volunteered to do the field work. And he was on site reviewing a process that we had in place, and he was just so grateful. And he said, "Yes, the way you guys handled that issue, it felt so good about it, and I volunteered for this audit because I'm just so impressed with the work you're doing in the ethics office." How powerful!
Amazing.
So those little nuggets happen, but finding informal ways to recognize people for doing good is so powerful.
And with that, we've reached time. Thank everybody for coming, and thank to the panel for their great input. Appreciate it.